In this section, we will look at some of the recommendations that came about as a result of this research in single-family dwellings. Use this menu to navigate the content and track your progress. Previous research has shown that fires in residential structures furnished with synthetic fuels are more likely to be in a ventilation-limited state at the time of fire department arrival. This is significant because ventilation-limited fires are less forgiving with regard to uncoordinated ventilation and suppression actions. If ventilation occurs in the absence of suppression, the additional air entrainment will likely increase the heat release rate of the fire. In the simplest sense, then, minimizing the time between ventilation and suppression limits the amount of oxygen that can react with high-temperature fuel gases before suppression can cool gases and extinguish the fire. The experiments that sequenced ventilation before suppression showed that fire growth and temperature increase in the fire room was possible even when initial ventilation and initial suppression were separated by no more than 30 to 60 seconds. During this time, ceiling temperatures in areas located between the fire and the low-pressure vent began to increase. In contrast, temperatures at lower elevations in the same areas decreased as fresh air was entrained. It is worth noting that as suppression efforts began, ceiling temperatures in remote areas also decreased from the local cooling. Ventilation actions that occurred after the onset of suppression did not result in additional fire growth in any of the experiments conducted as part of this series. For this reason, suppression crews might consider a water on the fire transmission as suppression actions are initiated, whether on the interior or the exterior, which would provide information to other crews operating on the fireground about when to begin ventilation. In general, the effectiveness of post-suppression ventilation varied substantially between structures, but the experiments in which toxic gas concentrations remained highest for the longest were those in which no timely ventilation actions were performed close to the occupant location. Let's take a look at an example. In experiments 18, 19, and 20, occupant packages were located on the structure's second story, above a first-story kitchen fire. Ventilation actions in these experiments were only performed on the first story. The chart shows the amount of time that elapsed between fire department intervention and when CO concentrations dropped below 1,200 parts per million, the threshold for ideal H conditions. The chart shows that CO concentrations took longer to decrease at locations that were above the fire than at occupant locations on the first floor, due to the lack of local exterior ventilation. Occupants at the second-story locations would continue to sustain a higher toxic exposure, even though the suppression efforts on the first story reduced temperatures and the production of combustion gas. Now let's hear from our technical panel.
On the fire ground has to be understood, and our guys, especially today in the fire service, guys want to know the why. Everybody wants to know why we're doing certain things, and so one thing that we've done, I feel extremely well, is giving the why to the members of if we aren't in coordination, how ventilation can get ahead of us and create a worse environment for us or any potential victims. And we've been educating our members on that for at least 10 years now, that coordinated piece has to be in conjunction with the ability for the fire attack crew to get water on the fire and that ventilation crew to put themselves in a position to do quality ventilation. The big takeaway in that, what we've learned piece for me is that I can validate your experience on the hose line being stuck and unable to advance until the truck put in the hole. And then now understanding that the only positive effect that has is changing the direction of the flow path, but it's going to increase the fire behavior on the back end. And understanding that not any victim outside of that flow path is going to have any improvement until we get water where it needs to go. That coordination piece and giving those guys the why behind all of that and validating their experiences is going to be a huge piece to the LA County Fire Department.
Of coordinated ventilation to like the fuse of a bomb. You know, that the bomb, the bomb's the fire, and that fuse is going to be dependent on all the factors around the fire itself, the building, and then the openings that are either presently available or ones that we create. So there's the different factors of, how advanced is the fire, what's the fuel package, what are the available openings, how big are they, what's their orientation, their proximity to each other. So all that's going to play into how quickly and how violently that fire is going to react to any additional sources of fresh air intake. So all of that's going to determine, how tight or, how liberal our timeline can be in that sense. But if we just go under the understanding that at the very least we have to have a charged hand line that's serviceable and that's moving into the seat of the fire and capable of flowing water and arriving at the seat of the fire before we start opening up, unless we can isolate that area that we're venting, or it's already isolated.
In this set of experiments, we did have several experiments where we were looking at ventilation which occurred basically immediately prior to suppression, so within 30 seconds of that onset of suppression. And even in those experiments, the fire growth that we saw outside of the fire room was generally limited to the upper portion of the hallway or the adjacent room or whatever, so we weren't really seeing any kind of appreciable fire growth because of that close time between those two actions.
Well, to put it simply too, to go back to the bomb analogy, with when we have effective suppression taking place, you're clipping that fuse off the bomb, so there's no bomb at the end of the fuse. So that's where, if you look at it from that sense, once like effective suppression is taking place, ventilation is going to be reap positive results.
Yeah, just to kind of expand, and I like your bomb and the fuse analogy. As long as we understand that when we are ventilating before suppression, we are burning that fuse faster. There's benefits to it, and I think you highlighted those really well. But just in the back of your mind, just know that fuse is burning faster with the additional ventilation. So you definitely got to get to snipping that fuse, if you will, which is in this case suppressing the fire.
Ventilation actions occurring before suppression can lead to rapid fire growth, resulting in a decrease in tenability for firefighters and building occupants. Ventilation decisions should consider this possibility while also considering that prompt ventilation may result in the best outcomes for potentially trapped occupants. In this series of experiments, ventilation actions that occurred immediately before or immediately after the onset of suppression actions had an overall greater benefit than when no additional ventilation actions were conducted at all. Previous research into water application highlighted the importance of coating as many surfaces as possible, either from the interior or the exterior, to fully knock down the fire. One of the concerns regarding exterior water application that remained was the likelihood that a post-flashover compartment fire could have weakened or missing sealing sections. Experiments 13 and 14 were designed to address this concern by examining straight stream exterior suppression in a compartment with a sealing failure. Let's take a look at the results. A slight difference between these two experiments that impacted the effectiveness of the straight stream suppression was the presence of ceiling rafters. In experiment 13, the ceiling rafters were left intact, whereas in experiment 14, they were removed. The rafters provide an additional obstacle to break up the hose stream, deflecting water onto burning surfaces and providing more cooling. This is evidenced in the difference in temperature recovery between the two experiments. In experiment 13, fire room temperatures take several minutes to recover after the initial decrease due to suppression, while in experiment 14, the fire room recovers to post-flashover temperatures within 50 seconds. Consideration should be given to including the lintel hit into the approach for exterior water application. Studies conducted in a controlled laboratory setting and acquired structure experiments highlight the importance of surface cooling and fuel wetting during water application. Surface cooling is achieved through the straight stream steep angle approach. Conditions in the fire compartment should change for the better and provide a visual indication of improvement to the nozzle operator outside. If a straight stream is applied at a steep angle from the exterior into the fire compartment and a change in conditions is not noted within a relatively short time frame, the stream may have punched through the ceiling lining or the lining material may have failed. A lintel or window header hit will likely improve water distribution inside the fire compartment. Even if the traditional straight stream, steep angle approach appears to have knocked down the fire, regrowth is an important concern until the nozzle team has made it to the fire compartment from the interior for complete fire extinguishment. To minimize regrowth potential, the lintel hit may be considered as an integral component to exterior water application, regardless of the perceived effectiveness of the straight stream, steep angle approach. As you can see here, the fire room temperature data indicates that although temperatures in the fire room decreased following the straight stream suppression, they began to increase again approximately 40 seconds after water application ceased. In both experiments, the lintel hit was more effective than the straight stream at reducing fire room temperatures. The fire attack study highlighted the importance of cooling during the advance of the hose stream on the interior of a structure. The current study reinforces that hose stream dispersion follows line-of-sight principles. Using similar principles to the lintel hit, a hose team may be able to get water into a fire compartment before arriving at the threshold of the fire room. As a hose team advances towards the fire compartment flowing water, they can use audible clues combined with any visual clues to locate the doorway to the fire room with the hose stream. If the nozzle operator can determine the location of the door frame, water can be deflected into the fire compartment by manipulating the nozzle up and down along the door frame. This will cause the stream to break apart, sending some water into the fire compartment and cooling surfaces long before the hose team has reached the threshold. Now we will hear from our technical panel.
Helped put a lot of things in perspective and really help hone our techniques, because where we use exterior water a lot in New Britain is we have a lot of front and rear porches on our multiple dwellings that are either open or enclosed. So these are high frequency fire for us, and being able to better understand how the water works and how it travels along surfaces, greatly enhanced our ability to use our water more effectively. And on my company, we've seen a marked difference in the efficient and effective use of our water because of that. So just looking at it from the stance of, where traditional thought was, we were always taught that when you put water off the ceiling, it has a sprinkler head effect almost, where in reality, we learned from the water mapping study that the vast majority of that water is going to ride along the surface until it hits another surface, which is typically the back wall. This is where it's also important too to recognize that size up isn't just a single event. It's not just when we first roll up and we're assessing the situation. We need to be constantly evaluating the conditions and also the effectiveness of our tactics. And this is where that cue-based decision making comes into play. Is we need to be taking in these sensory cues, whether they're visual, auditory with the stream usage. We rely a lot on the auditory component of it too, because if we're inside the building, typically we have no visibility or very poor visibility. So we rely on the acoustics and that sound
Sonar
feedback. Yeah, exactly. We're essentially using sonar, or a buddy. Jay Bonifield talks about he has a blind uncle, and he talks about how the nozzle firefighter is essentially using the nozzle stream just as his uncle utilizes his walking cane to help navigate his way and just in everyday life. So it's just taking those same principles and overlaying it to the fire ground, and now using that. You're sounding out the surfaces with your stream. So whether that they be holes in the floor or openings in the walls, to whether they be doorways or just other entryways or a failed ceiling, So it's taking those into play and then modulating your technique accordingly.
Surface cooling and fuel wetting during water application are critical for effective fire suppression. Surface cooling can be accomplished by using the straight stream, steep angle application, which uniformly coats surfaces with water. When the nozzle firefighter is on plane, or at the same elevation as the fire room, fuel wetting can be accomplished using the nozzle whip application. When the firefighter is off plane, or at a different level as the fire room, this nozzle whip would be impractical. In instances such as this, fuel wetting can be accomplished by using a lintel hit to break up the stream. Because visual cues after the initial straight stream, steep angle approach may be misleading, the lintel hit may be considered an integral component to exterior water application, regardless of the perceived effectiveness of the straight stream, steep angle approach. In all 20 experiments conducted as part of this study, opening the front door created an additional flow path from the front door to the fire room, allowing fresh air to flow through the front door towards the fire. In the experiments where an occupant exposure package was located between the front door and the fire room doorway, the entrained air from the exterior opening resulted in a reduction in carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide concentrations and an increase in oxygen concentrations. While occupant locations in the flow path experienced a benefit after the open front door, occupants who were remote from the flow path took longer to experience a benefit from suppression and ventilation actions. In this experiment, a vertical ventilation opening was made approximately 1 minute after the start of suppression actions. Although the toxic exposure in the hallway started to decrease as the suppression crew was applying water to the fire room, the conditions in the remote bedroom occupant package did not begin to improve until more than 2 minutes later. In the experiments in which horizontal ventilation was performed at any available opening, gas concentrations, visibility, and skin burn assessment package temperatures dropped faster than in experiments where no local ventilation was performed. This effect is most dramatically demonstrated by the improvement in visibility in the remote bedroom in experiment 12 compared to experiment 10. These two experiments were conducted on the second floor of the same structure. Here we can see the view from the remote bedroom. The images show that visibility at the floor level begins to improve within the first minute of local horizontal ventilation and continues to improve through the interior suppression actions. Without ventilation, on the other hand, visibility does not begin to return until nearly 4 minutes after the exterior suppression action. By horizontally ventilating bedroom windows, fresh air is entrained in the same manner as when the front door is opened, reducing the gas concentrations close to the floor and improving visibility for search crews. Now let's hear from our technical panel.
Data was one of the more profound pieces of the study in the sense that in this experiment, the remote bedrooms took as long as 2 minutes to show improvements in tenability, even with the vertical ventilation being placed, albeit after suppression, but it took that long for there to that exchange to impact those remote spaces, which is a considerable amount of time when you're talking in terms of victim survivability. So I think that just it's very important to really narrow in on what we mean when we say lifting and what that kind of corresponds to and its limitations. Whereas when people say that or talk about lift, they're talking about that area within the flow path when there's an air exchange taking place. So with ventilation, there's two sides to the coin. You have the exhaust, which is typically what is emphasized, which is the releasing of the byproducts of combustion, but there's also the proportionate influx of fresh air, that intake component, which is required in order to replace what we're letting out. But it's important to remember that that benefit is only taking place within the intake pathway itself. So in the remote spaces, even if they're interconnected, let's say like off of a common hallway with the doors being open, if those remote rooms don't have their own source of intake, let's say a window is open, or we take a window, there's no source of intake, so there's no air exchange taking place. I believe that data was one of the more profound pieces of the study, in the sense that
The results of these experiments showed that after effective suppression had begun, coordinated horizontal ventilation can benefit areas of a structure that may otherwise be isolated from the flow path.